Tuesday night, 8 o'clock, and this is the Bob Leonard Show. We'll be with you about an hour, and we take the stories you've been reading about in the newspaper and watching on television this week, and we put our spin on it. We tell you the story behind the story. What's really going on with this mainstream media story. And like we tell you every week, it's only our opinion. You can accept or reject it, but we're obviously going to have our say. Those of you who missed this show on Tuesday night, we replay it again late on Wednesday night from 11 to 12. If that's too late for you, you can see it on flinttalk.com. Just punch that in, and the show runs continuously 24 hours a day. And each week it's replaced with this week's show. So anyway, we have a lot of things we want to talk about tonight. I don't know whether we'll get to them all, but if we don't, we'll bring them back next week. This past Friday, a federal jury found a local politician, office holder, and his township guilty for damages of nearly $1 million for maliciously destroying a woman's business. You know, how did this happen? And who's going to pay this judgment? We'll talk about this tonight on this program. And there's new evidence that racism may have played a role in the apparent police lack of action in investigating the carjacking, kidnapping, sexual assault, and armed robbery of a black mother and her daughter at a gas station on the corner of Welsh Boulevard and Chevrolet Avenue about 6 weeks ago. We told you about this case, and we told you we were going to stay on top of it, which we did, and we might have some results now. And then if we have time, we want to talk about the sheriff's new paramedic program he is implementing in the city of Flint. Is it going to be good for Flint residents? Obviously, since we don't have one, it's going to be good for us. And then we have the question of, did Flint councilwoman, her response to the police union's call for her resignation, that's Carolyn Sims, for calling the 2 Flint police officers involved in the shooting of a knife-wielding woman murderers. Did her response to them asking her to resign help her or hurt her in today's recall election? Well, we'll have to wait and see. But let's go on here to the first story that I mentioned to you. Last Friday, as I said, a federal jury in Detroit found a local politician guilty of intentionally and maliciously destroying a young lady's business. Here's what the Flint Journal said today in the paper. It says, tow firm sues township, wins $700,000. That's what they want. Now, with interest, attorney fees, it's going to be close to $950 million. So anyway, here's what it says. The a U.S. District Court jury has awarded a former tow truck company owner nearly $700,000 in damages in a case against the township and supervisor, Tony McCurchie, that alleged he requested a female employee be replaced with a male. Terry Rojan, 57, filed a lawsuit in 2003 claiming Dave and Terry's towing and heavy hauling lost business and revenue when McCurchie demanded that she fire and replace her daughter, Stephanie Nelson, 36, an office manager, with a male employee. And this is Mrs. Wojan's comments. It was like dying a slow death. It was not pleasant at all, said Terry Wojan. Some mean people out there who lied about us during the whole process. Now here's what the lawsuit stemmed from. It stemmed from an angry incident that began when an angry man whose vehicle had been towed became verbally abusive to Wojan and her daughter. He called her terrible names, MF, C, F, I mean, just outrageous things he said to her. Wojan complained to McCurchie and asked him to uphold a state ordinance that prohibits the use of profanity in front of women and children. They claimed in the lawsuit that following their complaint, McCurchie went to the towing business, but instead of helping, he pointed towards Stephanie and said, "This is your problem, get rid of her and hire a man." The lawsuit claimed McCurchie threatened to pull the township's business with the company if it did not replace Stephanie with a male employee. Dave and Terry Towing had a verbal agreement to do business with the township when it needed help towing vehicles. The company eventually lost business when the township changed its policy so that the Genesee County Sheriff's Department no longer had to use the local business when towing a car. During the trial, Wojan's lawyer, Flint attorney Tom Papps, subpoenaed Genesee County Sheriff Robert Bacall. Bacall testified that Mackenzie expressed desire that the sheriff not use the towing company. Papps says that the sheriff really won the case for us. He helped us because he was honest and direct. Apparently, McKechnie was saying he never said that to Bacall, and Bacall said, yeah, he did. Now, Papps said he was pleased with the outcome of the trial as $300,000 in punitive damages awarded. Papps said the total amount of damages almost $700,000, and with interest and what have you, it'll be higher than that. We're going to talk to Papps here on this case in just a moment. Now, what's important here is that we have also a First Amendment freedom of speech, and the allegations in the pleadings talked about free speech retaliation. When this woman went to McKechnie to complain about this man who mistreated her, he retaliated against her. She has a right to freely speak and to make a complaint. When she did that, he retaliated against her business, and it caused the company to go bankrupt. So anyway, we had a conversation with Tom Papps yesterday about this case, and I think you'll be interested to hear what he has to say. Could you play that, please? Judgment in federal court regarding a First Amendment violation of a local citizen's rights here by a public official.
Correct.
Could you tell us what the violation of a local citizen's rights here by a public official?
Correct.
Could you tell us what that case was all about and what the First Amendment violation was?
Sure. It involves a family, the Wayon family in the Clio, Vienna area, who went to City Hall, basically Vienna Township, for help. And they raised matters of public concern like enforcement of the law. And instead of getting help from City Hall in the form of Supervisor Tony McCurchie retaliated against them and went behind their back and told the sheriff, who has a contract with Vienna Township for police services out there, not to use Dave and Terry's anymore. Or at least he said, I don't want you using Dave and Terry's anymore for towing. After that, the calls stopped for the Wayon family, the money stopped coming in, and their business went out of business. We call that First Amendment retaliation. That's a violation of the Wayon family's constitutional rights under the First Amendment to seek help from City Hall. And instead of getting the help they needed and should have gotten, they got punished by Supervisor Tony McCurchie.
Now, what was the judgment in that case?
The judgment was $678,750, and what's significant is $300,000 of that were punitive damages to punish Tony McCurchie, whom the jury found maliciously and intentionally retaliated against the Wayon family, and eventually their business went out of business because of it. That's something you see maybe once every 5 years, is a governmental official getting assessed punitive damages such as that $300,000. With interest, costs, and attorney fees, the total judgment is going to be about $957,000.
Now, one of the witnesses in your case was Sheriff Bob Leonard.
Thank goodness.
Well, we're hearing some rumbles that McCurchy or Vienna Township people or government people are going to retaliate against Leonard by taking his contract with the Sheriff's Department away from the township. And I don't know if you want to speak to that.
I would like to speak to that. Yes, I would. I would like to say this. Sheriff Robert Leonard is a truthful and honest person, and he told the truth on the witness stand to that jury in federal court in Detroit. The only thing Sheriff Robert Leonard is guilty of is telling the truth. And the truth was that Supervisor McCurchy came to the sheriff behind the scenes, behind everyone's back, and told the sheriff, I don't want you doing business with Dave and Terry's Towing. Now, under oath, when I took the deposition under oath of Tony McCurchy, he had denied that he did that. He said, didn't happen. I never had a conversation with the sheriff. I never had a conversation. I never said that. It's totally up to the sheriff as to who he uses for towing out in Vienna Township. Then I subpoenaed the sheriff to come in live at trial, and he says, that's not true. Tony McCurchy did tell me not to use Dave and Terry's Towing. So this federal court jury had to decide who was lying, because someone was obviously lying. And they decided the sheriff's telling the truth and McCurchy's lying. In fact, it became so obvious that the sheriff was telling the truth that by the time Tony McCurchy took the stand as the last witness in the trial, he conceded that the sheriff is probably right, that he did say that. But he tried to back off and say, but if I did say it, it was because I was worried about pricing. And I told the jury, isn't that something like a criminal defendant in a rape case saying, I never had sex with the woman, never touched her, never had intercourse, didn't happen, but if you believe I did, it was consensual. That's the same type of argument Tony McCurchy made to that federal court jury in Detroit. And I'm not surprised that they came back with $300,000 punitive damages against him.
Now, what's the next step in collecting your money?
That is the next step, collecting our money, because I'm not coming one dime off this. There's no error. They can appeal away all they want. As far as I'm concerned, it's money in the bank. There's no error. Eventually, we'll collect every penny of this.
And when you say they can appeal all they want, if they lose the appeal, they suffer consequences.
That's right. There's more attorney fees and costs. There's more appellate fees, and there's interest accruing. Every day, there's going to be interest on that $957,000.
Now, the people you represented in this case are from Clow,
yes,
Vienna Township area.
Correct.
And they owned a towing service that they lost because of this. Is that right?
Yes, called Dave and Terry's Towing. They'd been in business since the mid-1980s, and it was run by two women, Terry Wayon and Stephanie Nelson, her daughter-in-law. And they did just fine for all those years. I mean, they interfaced and handled the public. You know, men would come in with complaints. They did just fine. And matter of fact, Stephanie Nelson worked in the business since she was a kid in high school, you know, sort of a co-op job. So they've done it all these years, and they've done a very fine job. And Terry Wayon comes from a police family. Two of her brothers are Michigan State police officers who retired. The police sheriff's deputies who handled the towing out in Vienna Township love them. Terry always made sure she had donuts and bagels for them when they came out. They visited with Stephanie's kids and the children, two daughters. And it was just a wonderful setup, you know, for the family, and they were doing very well. They were well liked, and they had a great local business there in Vienna Township, and they were doing the job very professionally.
And you had a chance to spend some time with them. What was their reaction to the verdict?
They broke down into tears of joy. I think they were overwhelmed that the jury vindicated their honor and came back in their favor in such an overwhelming manner. It was just, they were overcome with tears of joy. Just spontaneous crying. We were all jubilant. The feeling was jubilation. And as we were leaving the courtroom, we walked outside the court and we were in the hallway, and the jurors were in an elevator with the door open, and they waved and smiled and had the thumbs up and the peace sign and said, "Good luck." And that again was overwhelming. It was one of the nicest ways I ever left a courtroom.
In your pleadings, Mr. Papps, you had some references to the young ladies who owned the towing business and indicated that there was probably some discrimination against them because they were female.
Yes, that's true.
Could you tell us about that?
Sure. It all started with an incident by a disgruntled customer who came in, and he was upset, because he'd been in a car crash, or his wife and child were hurt in a car crash. And he started using the F word with the women who were working there, F this, F that, and F you. And he finally ends up saying one of the most vicious things you could say to a woman. He called her an MFC, and they went to City Hall to see if something could be done about that, because Vienna Township has an ordinance out there, Ordinance 241, which says it's illegal to say swear words like that in front of women and children. So, sure, the supervisor comes out to look at the film, because this whole incident was caught on film. The supervisor, Tony McCurchie, comes out to look at the film, and the clerk, Richard Scott, and another councilman, Ludenbacher, and they look at the film and they watch this guy call her a MFC, and then McCurchie turns around, points a finger at the woman, Stephanie Nelson, and said, "There's your problem. Get rid of her and hire a man in here." The theory being that if you had a man in here, you could stand up to the other man. And the implication there, and he said this in front of Stephanie's father and mother-in-law, who owns the business, as though she's incompetent, despite the fact she'd been working in the business for a decade.
She's incompetent because she was a woman.
She's a woman. I mean, the implication is he didn't think women were capable of operating a towing business. And Terry says, "I can't believe you said something like that." And Dave, of course, says, "Are you crazy? You take this guy's side over my daughter, who's the victim of this guy?" And yet he did. And a few days after that, there was a conversation between Tony McCurchie and Dave Wayan, who's the husband of Terry Wayan, who owns the business. And McCurchie was talking about a $50 policy they were going to implement, meaning that Dave had to collect $50 now from people coming in. And Dave's saying, "Wait a minute, that's going to make me the human lightning rod. These guys are already mad. They've either been busted for drinking or dope, or they've been in a car crash. They're already hot when they come in. Now you want me to collect, now you say that they owe another $50, and they're going to go through the roof." McCurchie said, you know what McCurchie said to him in a federal court jury? Detroit heard this. McCurchie says to Dave, "Listen, smartass, you do what I say, I'll destroy your fucking business." And you know what? He made good on that promise. He destroyed their business. The way he did it, behind everyone's back, he went to the sheriff who had the contract on towing services and police out there, and he told the sheriff, "Don't use Dave and Terry's anymore." Okay? And then after that, Dave and Terry's was never called again. All the money dried up, and their business went belly up. So they go to City Hall, my people, the Wayan family, for help. Not only do they not get help, but they get retaliated against by this supervisor, whom the jury found did what he did maliciously and intentionally, and assessed $300,000 in punitive damages against him for it. This is a federal court jury that doesn't know anyone. They were picked because they didn't know anyone. They had no axe to grind. And the proofs were so obvious that they punished him with $300,000 in punitive damages. That type of thing happens maybe once every 5 years in federal courts. And it happened here.
Well, as you can see, Tom Papps, who represented this family, he's the he's an expert on employment law and First Amendment constitutional rights violation. That's why they went to him, and that's why they were successful. As he said, he brought this action for interfering with the woman's free speech to make a complaint to McKechnie about what this guy said to her. And there's a Michigan law that says that's illegal. She went there to make the complaint, and he retaliated against her. Wanted her replaced by a man, and then when she challenged him, he went to the sheriff. And the sheriff, he thinks he's being told by McKechnie not to use this woman and her family's towing service because it's too expensive. He assumes that he knows what he's talking about, so he does what McKechnie says because he works for McKechnie, in the fact that he provides the police support in the township from the sheriff's department. And he just assumed, according to the information we have, that McKechnie was saying, these people are too expensive, I want you to use this person. He never thought there was a retaliation of some kind going on until he went to trial. Now, as you can see, this is an important case with a very important result. It involves someone's constitutional rights being violated by a public official, in this case, to free speech. And because she expressed her mind in the speech, which the Constitution gives her a right to do, he retaliated against her, destroyed their business. That's what this lawsuit is about. This is why the action is called free speech retaliation. As an adjunct to this constitutional violation, there is the discrimination of McKechnie against a woman because she's a woman. That's not acceptable in today's world. And to the credit of Bob Pickel, he told the truth. Now, McKechnie was in there and in his deposition said that he never told Pickel that. Well, Pickel, he assumed apparently Pickel was going to back him up. But Pickel is going to tell the truth. He's not going to get involved in something like this and where there could be a charge of perjury. But the important thing is, not that they could have been charged with perjury, although that's significant, he just would tell the truth. Why would he lie? And that cost the township and McKechnie losing the case, and rightfully so. He was guilty of destroying this woman's business. And he violated her constitutional rights. And Pickel, to his credit, told the truth. And he may lose the contract because of this, but so be it. And he understood that when he went to the federal trial and testified. Well, let's go on here. About 6 weeks ago, I told you the story about a black woman and her 13-year-old daughter being abducted at gunpoint, robbed, sexually assaulted by an abductor who jumps in her car and makes them drive him around Flint for a couple of hours before they stopped in a neighborhood, and they jumped out of the car and ran away. Now the abductor then hijacks the car and drove off. On the following week's program, I observed that there had been no news about the progress of this investigation reported by the police since the abduction was first published, the day after. At that time, I said I felt the lack of attention may have been because the woman was black and it happened up in the North End, where lots of things happen. I speculated that, if the assault by this black man took place on Miller Road, and it was a white woman and her daughter that was abducted, they'd be hell to pay until this guy was caught. And also, kind of guilty of this racism here is the news media for not pressuring the police for update on the progress of this investigation. Both the police and the press allowed the racism to show through by ignoring this story after the first day. So no one misunderstands. I'm not suggesting the cops involved here, the particular cops, are personally racist. Some of the investigators on this case may be African American. Or the reporters who cover the case are personally racist. Many are African American. But I am saying the institutions they work for, the police department, the press, the TV stations, have built-in racism from years past that has never been corrected. It's called institutional racism. Why didn't the Flint mayor demand that they put more investigators on this case? I'm sure he certainly would. In my opinion, if one of his Miller Road neighbors would have been victims, and he should have. All I'm saying is, he should have here also put more investigators on it. The heads of the TV news, police department, mayor's office, the newspapers are all pretty much white organized. And they were, years ago they were white organized all the time, and there was personal racism dictating what these organizations would do. And it became built in. That's the way we've done it, always done it, so we're going to continue to do it. Now, the new people who run these departments, even though they're white, may not be racist as the people in the past were. Today, there is less racism, but it's still there. But these people, the police chief, the mayor, I don't think are necessarily racist. But I think they lack the sensitivity that they should have when they're considering these cases. And no one seemed to be sensitive to what we're talking about here. Racism has survived within these organizations. And the present day people running them aren't even aware in many cases that they are continuing the policies of racism built into the organizations. This type of racism, institutional racism in these organizations has been stabilized and perpetuated because it hasn't been corrected. And these police officers who may be African American and reporters who are African American are just following the direction. We won't have any change here until we educate this power structure that they have to change not only themselves, which I think they've done personally, but they have to change the institutions they're running and look at them carefully about what decisions they make based on historical precedent, which was established by personal racism. So what I'm saying is, I don't think they intentionally are guilty of racism. They may not even be aware that by carrying out their plan and their programs that they are racist, or the impact of their action is racist. You know, institutional racism is just as hurtful and injurious as personal racism, individual racism. You know, the case I'm talking about, where the African-American mother and her daughter were abducted, and after a day, the story fell off the shelf, and it was replaced by another crime, another victim. Even then, the claims against the mother and daughter should have precedent no matter what. 3 of the cases that were committed against them calls for life sentences. And a terrible, violent criminal is still on the streets roaming around, trying to decide who his next victim will be, black or white. Now, last Tuesday, and this is an interesting fact, I think, and you'll see the results of this. Like I promised on my program for the last 6 weeks ago when I first brought this up and talked about the possible racism being involved in the decision-making here on how to handle this case, I mentioned that I would continue to look at the case. I would continue to pursue it. Well, last Tuesday I called up Chief Hagler, and he was nice enough to take my call, and I asked him about this case, and I think he was kind of unsure of what was going on with it. Now, what bothers me about that is that he should have been more aware of what was going on. Now, I'm not suggesting he doesn't care. I think he does care. But I think he just kind of let things happen as they have in the past, where if this were a white mother and daughter, there would have been a big crackdown, assigned officers, reports every day in the newspaper on the progress. But we have a black woman and her daughter who in the past were considered something less than the white people in the community. And that was the old personal individual racism that dictated the institutional racism that they're living with today. Now, after I had this discussion with him, he told me he'd get back to me. Well, he didn't, but that's all right, because he took action, which I have to give him credit for. The very next day, after my conversation with him, and 6 weeks after the event had happened, there was a press conference of some kind where every one of the TV stations had the story, and the Flint Journal published an article on the story. Here's what transpired after my meeting with the chief. Can you play that next tape, please?
Sexually assaulted woman and her teenage daughter early last month. Take a look at this. Police say this is a composite of the suspect, a man about 5 feet 7 inches tall, 150 pounds, with a medium to dark complexion. He's between 16 and 18 years of age, with a thin mustache and goatee. Police believe his first name may be Deontay, goes by the nickname of D. If you have any information, call Flint Police.
An update now for ABC 12. This is for her 13-year-old daughter, who claimed they were carjacked at gunpoint yesterday morning and dropped off in the middle of a West Side neighborhood in Flint. Tanya Clausell says this all started when she and her daughter stopped at the Marathon gas station at the corner of Chevrolet and Welch on their way to school yesterday morning. Tanya says a man asked her for money. Then, when she said she didn't have it, he pulled out a gun and carjacked them. She says he rifled through her purse and tried to fondle both of them. Tanya then told him to take the car, and she and her daughter managed to escape.
He just had me in fear, I don't feel safe here.
Police are looking for the man and Tanya's 2004 four-door Chevrolet Cavalier, which has a dent on the driver's side rear bumper. If you have any information, you are urged to call Flint Police.
Now, the latter part of that story was the original story that happened the day after it. And nothing happened after that. Nothing. There was no follow-up. There was no alerting the public as to how the investigation was going, what they were finding out. The guy stole the car. They must have come up with the car. I still don't know if they come up with the car, whether there was fingerprints, but they did. Well, the day after I talked to them, they had this press thing going out. Now, here's the journal, and you saw it on there, they've got the composite of this guy. Here's what it says in the journal. Flint police are asking for the public help in identifying a man who last month carjacked a 33-year-old woman and her 13-year-old daughter. The man fondled them and threatened to sexually assault them before driving off in the car on April 3rd. His first name may be Dante or Dante, and he goes by the nickname of D or D-E-E, said Sergeant Anthony Pittman, an armed robbery investigator. I know Pittman. He's a good officer, very good officer. I'm glad to see him on this case. We want this guy, said Pittman. This is a bad individual. He described the suspect as 17 to 20 with a thin mustache and goatee. The suspect is about 5'7" tall and 150 pounds. Now, the only way the police can get this information is one of two ways. They told him the day after they had been abducted, sexually fondled, robbed, and the day after. Okay? Now they sit with this information. Or they didn't get the information. They didn't ask the woman about it because the case wasn't that important, maybe, to them because of this institutional racism. And when I go see the chief, they then go out and get this information. Either way, it was wrong. Either way, if they got it the first day, why did they have to wait for my inquiry to put this on? Here we have a guy that's a dangerous individual on the streets. It takes 6 weeks of my inquiry to get the police to tell the public who they need to help on this case what's going on. And here's what the guy looks like. He may have been arrested in jail by now, but now he's out there, obviously a threat to individuals, black and white. See, that's why the decision to put this on the bottom shelf, in my opinion, because of this institutional racism, not only hurts the African American community, it also hurts the entire community, black and white, because this guy's out there roaming around. This should have been taken care of the first day. This information should have been in the next day. Constant references to the progress of the investigation should be made. 2 or 3 officers is not enough on this case. They should have had 6 or 8 of them. They say they're short-handed, but they could have taken them off burglaries, frauds, and what have you, and put them on this case until it was solved. God forbid somebody gets hurt by this guy before he's caught. And of course, the people who suffered the most, who this kind of racism disrespects the most, are the mother and the daughter. They're entitled to attention. They're entitled to an investigation. And they're entitled to have top priority on the crime that was committed against them. Hopefully, the mayor's office that has this built-in racism that's not necessarily caused by the present mayor, who generally has a pretty good reputation in the African American community. It's built into the police department. They've got to get rid of it. It's built into the press. They've got to get rid of it. They've got to think these things out. They've got to have some sensitivity to what we're talking about here. That when a case occurs and it's serious, it shouldn't make any difference whether the victim is black or white. Well, hopefully he gets this guy before he does any more damage and hurts anybody. Now, here's a case where Carolyn Sims, who's the city councilwoman, you remember, she made the crazy, stupid allegation that the two police officers involved in the shooting of this woman were murderers. And this is, murderers is premeditation, malice aforethought. None of that could be in here. The most that you could say about them is they were negligent, and whether that negligence constituted the crime of manslaughter. But we don't know. We don't know because the investigation isn't done. And like I said last week, the key issue here is not what the witnesses think should have happened or they might have done under similar circumstances. It's what was in the heads of those police officers at that moment that woman, supposedly, according to the releases, was 3 or 4 feet away from them with a knife, waving it around. Again, according to the information. I suggest the best way to deal with this case, so everybody can see it, so both sides will be satisfied after hearing the testimony, is to have an inquest. Don't do this behind closed doors like you usually do. Put it out there in the public. Let a judge hear this case. Bring the witnesses in under oath. Subject them to examination by the prosecutor. And if the defendants or if the officers have attorneys, let them come in and do the cross-examination of some of these people. You really want to find out what's in that case. When I was prosecutor, the worst thing a prosecutor could do, an assistant of mine could do, is to bring a bad case over. And the best way to ferret it out is at the preliminary examination, where you have witnesses take the stand under oath and you're entitled to examine them and the other side is entitled to cross-examine them. An inquest is somewhat like that. A jury listens to it, comes back and makes requests or makes recommendations to the prosecutor on what he should do. The prosecutor can take the request or ignore it, but at least the public will know what information the prosecutor has. And then if he makes a decision one side and the other side doesn't like it, at least you know what it's all about. So anyway, when she makes this statement, the police were outraged. The union recommended she resign from the council after remarks like that. And it was kind of a boo-boo. I don't think she realized the implications of what she was saying. But whatever, it was a stupid statement. It was unfair. But anyway, it's a situation where Councilwoman Sims decides to have a press conference to counter the police union's request that she resign. And as the process moved forward, she has this press conference with a lot of her supporters, and the television stations cover the story. And you know, what I want to do now is I want to show you and compare. We do this sometimes from time to time, is compare the stories and see who got the story right or came closest to what the story was all about. Here we have a press conference by Carolyn Sims to counter what the police union has criticized her for. And the first one I want you to look at is the Channel 12's report on this story. Can you now I asked you to watch this thing closely because we're going to show you then Channel 5 story on the same story. And you tell me if there's any difference. Can you play the Channel 12 one, please?
Sims. On that same day, Genesee County Commissioners will vote on buying tasers. ABC 12's Joel Fike joining us now from the newsroom. Joel, are these two items related?
Well, Angie, it depends who you ask. Sims says she likes the idea of tasers for the city in light of a recent police shooting. But the sheriff said there is no connection between that incident and his request for the equipment.
Two Flint police officers used deadly force against 46-year-old Joanne Burgett last month when she refused to put down her knife. A few days later, Councilwoman Carolyn Sims made these comments about the shooting. She also likened it to the tragedy at Virginia Tech. The head of a police union called her comments ridiculous and inflammatory and urged Sims to resign. Next to a group of her supporters, Sims says she won't resign and won't apologize for her comments.
The terminology of murder, whether I use murder or killing, the result was the death of Miss Burgett. I'm not going to apologize for being a human being and having emotions as well as most citizens in the community.
That's right. Right there.
She also praised a proposal by the sheriff to buy tasers for the county.
His quick actions support my position about the use of other preventive measures.
But the sheriff says the county's purchase of tasers has nothing to do with the recent police shooting.
It was totally independent of the Flint police shooting. And if anyone is suggesting that that is the reason that I was there, that there's a relationship, they are totally wrong.
McCall says the timing of the taser request has more to do with economics. The tasers usually cost $1,000 each, but Oakland County Sheriff is offering used ones for $125 each. The county board will vote on Tuesday whether to purchase 26 of the devices. Joel Fike, ABC 12.
Well, I actually believe that the sheriff's request probably was generated by what happened to this woman, because I think most people say if there was the tasers, they may have been able to hit her with that and avoid killing her. And that may be true. But I think what he is saying is, look, the mere fact that I'm asking for tasers is not in any way intended to be critical of the police, because they didn't have them. So we don't know whether or not they acted responsibly. That's still to be decided. But here we have, and I got to commend Joe Fike because he did go to the sheriff. Now here we have a case where this woman is talking about resigning, is talking about in her press conference, that's Carolyn Sims, that she's not going to resign and she's not going to give in to their complaints, and she's going to stick up and fight all the way through this, and that the taser thing the sheriff is pursuing is a good idea because if the Flint police had it, maybe, and she may be right on that. If they had it, they would have used the taser rather than shooting the woman. I'm sure that's what would happen, but they didn't have it. So they're now faced with the reality of a woman coming at them with a knife. Did they act properly or didn't they? But anyway, it's a story. That's the story. Now we have Channel 5's story. You tell me what you think. Can you play that, please?
Fraternal Order of Police, and now Flint City Councilwoman Carolyn Sims is drawing fire for comments that she allegedly made about a deadly police shooting. And this evening, Sims is now telling her side of that story. Here's Adrian Broadus.
I'm not going to apologize for being a human being and having emotions as well.
Councilwoman Carolyn Sims' message was straight to the point.
He did not cast his vote for me to become the 5th Ward City Council person, and I have no intention of resigning per his request.
With a group of supporters at her side, the retired Flint officer continued to criticize the city police for shooting and killing a woman at this mobile home park 2 weeks ago. Sims and her backers are calling Union President Keith Spears' petition for her to resign outrageous and a political stunt for Mayor Don Williamson.
Anybody that speaks up against the mayor, then you're going to be on the bad list.
If anybody ought to resign, Keith Spears ought to do the right thing. He ought to be the one to resign because he has proven he don't have the ability to separate the difference between him and the union members.
And Union President Keith Spears says he's not backing down either. He says he's going to do all he can to protect his officers.
I'm going to do everything I can to protect the officers that we have from lies and false accusations that could land them in prison.
In the midst of the battle, Spears says it's unfortunate a life was lost, but he applauds his officers for doing their job.
I feel terrible for her, and so do the officers. I guarantee you that. No, nobody wins in this situation. Try to hang them because they had to do their job.
In Flint, Adrian Broadus, WNEM TV5.
Now the police...
About this is, I don't think the reporter from 5 really had a grasp of what the story was. She was thrown in at the last minute, and she was going to get something for the 6 o'clock news no matter what. And I think what is important here and what's significant is she allows the detractors of the mayor get their 2 cents in against the mayor. What in the world does the mayor have to do with what Carolyn Sims says about these police officers? He didn't tell her to call the murderers. That's pretty clear. She didn't even mention the mayor at her press conference. Why would you even bring that up? Other than the fact she may not have understood the facts in this case. But anyway, obviously, I think 12 had a better understanding what was going on because Fike, obviously, he's been around a long time. He knows what's going on with these cases. And I think this is a new reporter, and she was just going to come up with something. And one of the things she comes up with is the detractors of the mayor sticking their nose into this thing and getting a shot at him when he wasn't even involved. If she was paying attention to Sims's comments at her press conference, which she read this prepared statement, there was no mention of the mayor. So why do you throw that in there? Well, she needed apparently to use some time, and that's what happened with it. And I think that that's unfortunate. Now, so in the end, if you watch Channel 12 News the night of the press conference, you got the real story. If you only watch Channel 5, Instead, you got kind of a make-believe story. But anyway, we have this, as I said, this case has a long way to go. It has to be investigated. I again urge the prosecutor to have an inquest. I've conducted these inquests in these kinds of cases in the past, and I've had juries make recommendations, and we followed them, and sometimes we didn't follow them, but at least the public was aware of what was going on. In other words, the decision wasn't made behind closed doors like most decisions in regard to issuing warrants are done. When you come to a prosecutor and you say, we have this case, they usually present statements from witnesses that they've talked to, not under oath, and based on that, a warrant may be issued based on probable cause. Then a preliminary examination is held, and I would say of the felony charges that are issued based on the police reports, probably 60-70% of them are reduced in district court or dismissed because the witnesses, as indicated in the police reports, don't come across that way. And that's not the cop's fault. He just takes down what the witnesses say. He doesn't know they'll collapse under oath. Sometimes he might, and he might tell the prosecutor that and say, I don't think this witness is going to hold up. I'm concerned about the allegations, and no warrant is issued. But if one is, that's what you do at the preliminary. You weed out the bad cases. And I'm saying, in this case, and it's public, it's under oath, it's before a judge, the same thing with an inquest. You can let the public know, and I think you have an obligation to let the public know what this case is all about and what was in the mind of these police officers when they responded in the violent way they did. Today, most courts will protect police officers if they're acting within their authority. A Supreme Court case just came down this week in which the police officers were chasing an individual who had been in a hit and run or some kind of crime that he had committed, and he lost control of his car and was seriously injured, and the family sued the police for pursuing. And the court said the cops were all right, they did the right thing. Once they're pursuing, it's not their fault if somebody like that gets injured, because they're the ones who created the problem. They're the injured party. So you keep those things in mind when you consider this case with the police officials and the shooting of this woman. We have a lot of other things we wanted to get to, but we're short on time, so we'll try to bring them to you next week. In the meantime, we'll be at the